The crack of a rifle split the dawn silence over the Texas plains. Jack Sullivan lowered his Winchester, watching as the small pack of wolves scattered away from his cattle. 7 years after Gettysburg, and he still carried the habits of a soldier, awake before first light, constantly vigilant. "That's how you stay alive," he muttered, checking the rifle's chamber before sliding it back into its scabbard. At 45, the former Union cavalry officer wore his years in the lines around his eyes and the silver threading through his beard, but his 6-foot frame remained imposing. The scar running down his right cheek, a Confederate saber's parting gift, had faded to a pale line, but the memories of what he'd lost in the years since were etched deeper. As the morning sun climbed higher, Jack rode toward Oak Ridge to collect supplies for the Triple S Ranch. He hadn't planned on getting involved in someone else's troubles. God knows he had enough of his own. But fate had other ideas. The steam engine's screech echoed across Oak Ridge Station as Jack dismounted. Through the settling dust, he noticed a young woman standing alone at the edge of the platform. She clutched an infant to her chest, her simple blue traveling dress wrinkled from the journey, wisps of auburn hair escaping her bonnet. "He ain't coming, ma'am," the station master said, sweeping the wooden boards. "Train's been here near an hour now." Jack watched as the woman swallowed hard, fighting visible emotion. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice barely audible, "or a delay of some sort." The station master's expression told the story. "Is there a hotel nearby where I might wait?" she asked, maintaining dignity despite her circumstances. "The Oak Ridge Inn's just down the way, but—" The station master hesitated. "Might be best if you visit the sheriff's office first. Mr. Harrington left something for you there yesterday." The woman's knees visibly buckled. "Yesterday?" "Yes'm. Packed up his wagon and headed out after that. Said he was bound for California." The baby began to wail, its cries growing more desperate as the woman tried to soothe it. Jack had seen enough. He approached with measured steps, spurs jingling against the wooden platform. "Afternoon, Pete," he called to the station master. "Any packages come in for the Triple S today?" "Nothing today, Jack. Though we've got something of a situation here." Pete nodded toward the woman. Jack turned his attention to her, noting the fear beneath her composed exterior. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "you look like you could use some assistance." "I'm fine, thank you," she managed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Jack Sullivan had watched men die on battlefields, had rebuilt a life from nothing after losing everything. The sight of this young woman, clearly abandoned and trying desperately not to fall apart, stirred something he thought long buried. "Let me help you both," Jack said, stepping forward. "My wagon's just around the corner. I can take you to the sheriff's office, and we can sort this out proper." The woman hesitated, conflict clear in her green eyes. "I don't even know your name, sir," she said, her Boston accent pronounced against his Western drawl. "Jack Sullivan, ma'am. I run the Triple S Ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Ask anyone around here. They'll vouch for me." Pete nodded in confirmation. "Jack's good people, ma'am. One of the most respected ranchers in the county." After a deep breath, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I'm Elizabeth Cooper, and this is Emma." As Jack helped her into his wagon, he couldn't have known that this moment, this simple act of decency, would change the course of both their lives forever. Sheriff Miller's office was quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock when Jack and Elizabeth entered. The sheriff looked up from his desk, his salt and pepper mustache twitching in recognition. "Sullivan," he nodded, then turned his attention to Elizabeth. "You must be Miss Cooper." "She is," Jack confirmed. "Seems Harrington had a change of plans." The sheriff's weathered face showed no surprise. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "He left this for you, Miss Cooper." With trembling fingers, Elizabeth accepted it. Jack noticed Emma had fallen asleep against his chest, one tiny hand curled around his finger. Something about that trusting gesture tightened his throat. The letter inside was brief and coldly formal. Miss Cooper, I regret to inform you that circumstances have changed since our correspondence began. Upon reflection, I do not believe I am suited to the role of husband or father. I have decided to seek my fortune in California. Enclosed is $20 to assist you in returning east. James Harrington. Elizabeth read it twice before looking up, her face pale but composed. He's gone to California. He's not coming back. Yes, ma'am. Left yesterday morning. The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. Elizabeth glanced at the $20 enclosed with the letter. Not even enough for a train ticket halfway back to Boston. Sheriff, Miss Cooper will need accommodations, Jack said. Is Mrs. Holloway still taking boarders? She is, but... The sheriff hesitated. But she doesn't accept children, Elizabeth finished for him, recognizing the hesitation. An uncomfortable silence followed, confirming her fears. Jack made his decision in that moment, one that would later seem inevitable, as though the path had been laid out for him long before. Miss Cooper could stay at the Triple S, he said. We've got the old foreman's cabin. It's small but clean. My brother Henry's there, and old Tom Winters, our foreman. There would be no impropriety. Elizabeth stared at him. Mr. Sullivan, I couldn't possibly impose. It's not an imposition, he interrupted gently. The cabin's sitting empty, and we could use an extra pair of hands. Mrs. Winters, Tom's wife, has been complaining about having to cook for the hands since her arthritis got bad. You're offering me employment? Elizabeth asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Room, board, and a fair wage, Jack confirmed. At least until you decide what you want to do next. Sheriff Miller studied Jack with a slight frown. That's mighty generous, Sullivan. It's practical, Jack replied, though something deeper than practicality had prompted his offer. Miss Cooper needs a place to stay, and I need someone to help with cooking. Seems like a simple solution. As they left the sheriff's office, Jack caught a glimpse of Wallace Thornton, the local banker, watching them from across the street with peculiar interest. Their eyes met briefly before Thornton turned away. Jack felt a flicker of unease. Thornton never took interest in anything unless there was money involved, and he'd been asking questions about Harrington's affairs for weeks. The Triple S ranch spread out before them as they approached, a collection of well-maintained buildings nestled in a small valley with cattle dotting the distant pastures. Jack had built it from nothing after the war, starting with 20 head of cattle and a determination to create something lasting in a world that had taken everything from him. As they drove up to the main house, Jack's younger brother Henry emerged, followed by old Tom Winters, the ranch foreman whose bow-legged gait spoke of decades on horseback. You've been gone a while, Henry said, then noticed Elizabeth and Emma. Curiosity replaced concern in his expression. This is Miss Elizabeth Cooper and her daughter Emma, Jack explained after making introductions. They had some trouble in town. Miss Cooper will be staying in the foreman's cabin and helping with the cooking. If either man was surprised by this announcement, they hid it well. Instead, both offered practical assistance, Henry volunteering to build a crib for the baby, old Tom mentioning that his wife Martha had recently aired out the cabin. As Jack showed Elizabeth to her new quarters, he was struck by how small and vulnerable she looked against the vast Texas landscape. Yet there was steel in her spine. It's not much, he said, watching her survey the modest cabin, but it's clean and weather-tight. It's perfect, Elizabeth replied with genuine gratitude. Later that evening, after Elizabeth had settled in, Jack sat alone on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold. The decision to bring her here had been impulsive, unlike him. Since losing Sarah and Michael to typhoid 7 years ago, he'd lived by routine and caution. Never figured you for taking in strays, old Tom said, settling into the chair beside him with a grunt. She's not a stray, Jack replied. She's a woman who got dealt a bad hand. Reminds me of someone else I know, Tom observed quietly. Someone who showed up out here after the war with nothing but nightmares and determination. Jack said nothing, but Tom's words hit their mark. He remembered those dark days after Sarah and Michael died, when only the grueling work of building the ranch had kept him from following them to the grave. Just be careful, Jack, Tom added. Heart's like a bone that's been broken. Heals stronger, maybe, but you never forget the break. 3 days later, Jack found Elizabeth in the corral, watching him work with a young quarter horse. The morning sun caught in her auburn hair, turning it to fire. You have a way with them, she observed as he guided the horse through its paces. They trust you. Animals are honest, Jack replied, patting the horse's neck. No pretense, no lies. Unlike people, Elizabeth said softly. Jack studied her for a moment. Some folks are worth trusting. A small smile touched her lips. I'm beginning to think so. The moment was broken by the sound of breaking glass and a child's cry from the direction of the main house. They both turned to see Emma, who had been playing near the porch under Martha's watchful eye, screaming in terror as a rattlesnake coiled just feet away from her. Jack moved without thinking, drawing the Colt revolver from his hip holster as he ran. The snake reared back, ready to strike. In one fluid motion, Jack aimed and fired, the bullet severing the rattler's head clean from its body. The gunshot echoed across the ranch as Jack scooped Emma into his arms, checking her for injury. The child clung to him, sobbing against his shirt. She's all right, he assured Elizabeth as she rushed up, face pale with fear. Snake didn't get her. Thank God, Elizabeth breathed, reaching for her daughter. As she took Emma, her hand lingered on Jack's arm. And thank you. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Elizabeth found Jack cleaning his revolver at the kitchen table. Mr. Sullivan, she began, then corrected herself. Jack, there's something I need to tell you about Emma and me. He looked up, his blue eyes steady. I'm listening. Emma isn't my niece, as I've let people believe. She's my daughter. If Jack was surprised, he didn't show it. He simply nodded for her to continue. Elizabeth took a deep breath. After my parents died, I worked as a maid for a wealthy family in Boston. The son, he pursued me, made promises. Her voice faltered. When I told him I was with child, he denied everything. His parents dismissed me without a reference. Jack's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. A women's boarding house took me in. After Emma was born, they helped me arrange the mail-order marriage. Mr. Harrington said in his letters that he didn't mind me bringing my orphan niece. It seemed like a chance at a new life. And then he abandoned you too, Jack finished, his voice tight with anger on her behalf. Elizabeth nodded, waiting for judgment. Instead, Jack said simply, Thank you for telling me. It changes nothing about our arrangement. Most people would think differently, she said, surprise evident in her tone. I'm not most people, Miss Cooper. His gaze held hers. Out here, a person's judged by what they do, not what's been done to them. The next morning, Jack took Elizabeth to a clearing behind the barn. He carried a Winchester Model 1873 rifle and a Colt revolver. Time you learn to shoot, he said. Out here, it's a necessary skill, especially for women alone with a child. Elizabeth accepted the rifle gingerly, surprised by its weight. Jack positioned himself behind her, adjusting her grip and stance. The key is breathing, he instructed, his voice close to her ear. Exhale halfway and then squeeze. Don't pull the trigger. Her first shot went wide of the bottles he'd set up as targets. So did her second and third. Keep your shoulder firm against the stock, Jack advised. The rifle's an extension of your body. On her fifth attempt, Elizabeth hit the bottle, sending glass shattering. The satisfaction was unexpected and powerful. Good, Jack said simply, but she could hear approval in his voice. Again. By the end of the hour, Elizabeth had hit more targets than she'd missed. Her shoulder ached, and her ears rang slightly. But she felt a new confidence. "Thank you," she said as they walked back to the house, "for teaching me, for all of this." Jack nodded, meeting her eyes briefly before looking away. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "Riders coming!" Henry's shout broke the morning quiet 2 weeks later. Jack stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and watched as 5 horsemen approached the ranch at a gallop. "Get inside," he told Elizabeth quietly. "Take Emma with you." She hesitated only a moment before gathering Emma and retreating into the house. Jack recognized the lead rider immediately. Wallace Thornton, the banker, flanked by 4 men, including his clerk, and what appeared to be hired guns. "Sullivan!" Thornton called as they reined to a stop in the yard. Unlike the others, he wore a city suit despite the dust and heat. "Thornton," Jack acknowledged. "What brings you out to the Triple S?" "Business," Thornton replied, his pale eyes calculating as they swept over the ranch. "Concerning your house guest." Jack's expression remained neutral. "Miss Cooper is my employee. What business could you have with her?" "Harrington borrowed heavily from my bank before he left. Used property as collateral." Thornton produced a folded document from his jacket. "Property he's apparently abandoned, along with his bride-to-be." "That's between you and Harrington," Jack said evenly. "Not anymore." Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You see, I've learned that Harrington arranged this marriage as a way to manage his property while he was away. The woman is essentially his proxy." "Pure speculation," Jack countered. "And still none of your concern." "Everything in this county is my concern, Sullivan." Thornton's tone hardened. "I want to speak with her. There might be a mutually beneficial arrangement to be made." Jack took a step forward. "She's not interested." "Why don't we let her decide that?" Thornton's voice took on an edge. "Or are you keeping her isolated for your own purposes?" Jack's hand dropped to his sidearm. "You want to rephrase that, Thornton?" The tension crackled between them. One of Thornton's men, a rough-looking fellow with a pock-marked face, shifted nervously, his hand straying toward his gun. "Easy, Maddox," Thornton cautioned, then turned back to Jack. "No offense meant, Sullivan, just concern for the lady's welfare." "Your concern is noted," Jack said coldly. "Now, state your actual business or ride out." Thornton's facade of civility slipped. "Fine. Tell Miss Cooper I'll be foreclosing on Harrington's property. If she has any claim to it, she'd better present it at my bank within the week." As Thornton turned his horse to leave, the nervous gunman, Maddox, suddenly drew his pistol. Whether he intended to fire or merely threaten wasn't clear, but the movement was enough. Jack's Colt appeared in his hand as if by magic, aimed squarely at Maddox's chest. "Don't," Jack warned, his voice deadly calm. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Maddox slowly holstered his weapon. "Control your dog, Thornton," Jack said, "or I'll put him down." Thornton's face flushed with anger, but he nodded curtly to Maddox. "We're leaving." As they rode away, Jack remained on the porch until they were specks on the horizon. Only then did he holster his gun and turn to find Elizabeth standing in the doorway, her face pale. "He wants something," she said. "Something more than recovering a debt." Jack nodded, his expression grim. "Thornton never makes a move without an angle. We need to find out exactly what Harrington was involved in." The answer came 3 days later in the form of a telegram delivered by a young boy from town. Jack read it with growing concern before handing it to Elizabeth. "Miss Cooper, stop James Harrington. Deceased California. Stop left will naming you and child beneficiaries. Stop please contact. Attorney Samuel Wright, San Francisco. Stop urgent matters to discuss stop." "Dead," Elizabeth whispered, shock evident in her voice. "Mining accident, according to the boy who brought this," Jack replied. "But it explains Thornton's sudden interest. He must have gotten wind of this somehow. But why would James name me in his will? After abandoning me? Guilt, maybe. Or he had a change of heart. Jack frowned. Either way, it seems you might have inherited something of value. Something Thornton wants. Jack rode into town the next day to send a telegram to the San Francisco attorney, explaining that Elizabeth couldn't travel but requesting details about the inheritance. The response came 3 days later. Miss Cooper, Stop Harrington owned deed to property in Oak Ridge. Stop house in 20 acres with water rights. Stop also small bank account. Stop papers require signature. Stop will send by post. Stop condolences on your loss. Stop right stop. Water rights? Jack said sharply, reading over Elizabeth's shoulder. That's what Thornton's after. That 20 acres must include access to Oak Ridge Creek. Is that important? Elizabeth asked. In cattle country, water's everything, Jack explained. Whoever controls access to Oak Ridge Creek controls half the grazing in the county. Thornton's been trying to squeeze the smaller ranchers for years. Elizabeth looked troubled. So this property has significant value. More than Harrington probably realized when he used it as collateral. Jack studied her face. It changes things for you. She looked up at him, suddenly understanding his concern. You think I'll leave the Triple S now that I have property of my own? It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. It would make sense. You'd be independent, beholden to no one. The thought had crossed her mind fleetingly, but she was surprised by how little appeal it held. The Triple S had become home in a way no place had been since her parents died. And Jack had become important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Is that what you want? She asked, studying his face. For me to leave? No, he replied with an intensity that surprised them both. But I want you to have choices, Elizabeth. Real choices, not just making the best of limited options. Before she could respond, Henry burst into the house, his face flushed with exertion. Jack, riders coming fast from town. Looks like Thornton and some of his men, and the sheriff's with them. Stay inside, Jack ordered, checking his revolver before stepping onto the porch. Henry and old Tom flanked him, rifles ready. Sheriff Miller rode at the front of the group that approached, his expression grim. Beside him, Thornton sat astride his black gelding, a triumphant smile playing at his lips. Behind them rode Maddox and 3 other armed men. Sullivan, the sheriff called as they halted in the yard. We need to talk. What's this about, Sheriff? Jack asked, though he had a fair idea. Mr. Thornton here has filed a complaint, Miller explained, uncomfortable but official. Says you're harboring a woman who's attempting to defraud his bank. That's ridiculous, Jack replied evenly. Miss Cooper hasn't attempted to defraud anyone. Thornton produced a document with a flourish. This says otherwise. A deed transfer signed by James Harrington the day before he left for California, conveying all his property to me in settlement of his debts. Jack's eyes narrowed. Convenient timing. The law doesn't concern itself with timing, Sullivan, only with legal documents, Thornton said smugly. Now, I'll be taking possession of what's mine, including any papers or correspondence relating to Harrington's affairs that Miss Cooper might have. Jack didn't move from the porch. Let me see that document. After a moment's hesitation, Thornton handed it to the sheriff, who brought it to Jack. Jack examined it carefully, noting the signature at the bottom. This isn't Harrington's signature, he said flatly. And you're a handwriting expert now? Thornton scoffed. I fought alongside Harrington at Antietam, Jack revealed, his voice hard. We served in the same regiment for 2 years. I've seen his writing on 100 letters and reports. This news visibly startled Thornton. You never mentioned knowing him. You never asked, Jack turned to the sheriff. This signature is a forgery. Compare it to the one on Miss Cooper's telegram from San Francisco. As if on cue, Elizabeth emerged from the house, the telegram in her hand. Sheriff Miller, I believe this will help clarify matters. Before the sheriff could respond, Maddox suddenly drew his gun. "Enough talk!" he shouted, aiming at Jack. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jack shoved Elizabeth behind him as he drew his Colt. A shot rang out, but it was Henry who had fired first, the bullet striking Maddox's shoulder and spinning him backward off his horse. In the confusion that followed, the sheriff's voice rose above the shouts and curses. "Next man who draws gets a bullet. This is still my county, and we'll settle this according to law." Under Miller's stern gaze, tensions gradually subsided. Maddox was disarmed and his wound tended to, while the sheriff examined both the deed and the telegram. "These signatures don't match," he confirmed after careful study. "Not even close. And a telegram from a California attorney carries more weight than a questionable deed with no witnesses." Thornton's face had gone from triumphant to thunderous. "This isn't over, Sullivan." "Yes, it is," the sheriff countered. "Unless you want to be charged with attempted fraud. The circuit judge arrives next week. I'm sure he'd be interested in this case." Faced with legal consequences, Thornton reluctantly backed down. As the group prepared to leave, the sheriff pulled Jack aside. "Watch your back," he warned quietly. "Thornton doesn't take defeat well." Jack nodded. "We will." After they'd gone, Elizabeth turned to Jack, her eyes wide with the realization of what had nearly happened. "You knew James Harrington? From the war?" "Not well," Jack admitted, "but well enough to recognize his handwriting. He was a decent soldier, if a poor judge of peacetime company." He looked at her curiously. "Does it bother you that I knew him?" "No," she said after a moment's thought. "It feels like providence, somehow, as if you were meant to be the one to help me." Jack had never been one for notions of fate or divine intervention. Life had taught him harsh lessons about the random nature of tragedy and blessing alike. And yet, looking at Elizabeth in that moment, he couldn't entirely dismiss the idea that some larger force had brought them together. The following Sunday, Jack drove Elizabeth to see the property she had inherited. The house was modest but solidly built, with a porch facing the creek and enough space for a small family. The land around it was good, fertile soil with abundant water access. As they walked the boundary markers, Jack pointed out the property's features with a cattleman's eye. "This is prime land. The water rights alone make it valuable." "I was thinking of something different than cattle," Elizabeth said, her voice thoughtful. "When I was at the boarding house in Boston, I saw so many women like me, alone, with children, few options. The women who ran the house gave us shelter and a chance to rebuild." Jack listened, watching her face animate with passion. "What if I use this place for the same purpose? A haven for women in difficult circumstances, a place to learn skills, get back on their feet." "A haven," Jack said softly. "Exactly. A haven of hope." Elizabeth's voice grew more confident. They could stay until they found work or remarried or saved enough to start over. "It's a good idea," Jack said, genuine admiration in his tone. "A worthy purpose for this land. Do you think it could work here in Oak Ridge?" "It won't be easy," he acknowledged. "Thornton and his kind won't like it. But there are good people here, too. Folks who understand that sometimes people need a helping hand." Elizabeth smiled, warmed by his encouragement. "I'd need help to get started. The house needs repairs, and I know nothing about managing land. Henry's good with carpentry, and I know a thing or two about building something from nothing." As they walked back to the wagon, Jack stopped suddenly. "Elizabeth, there's something I need to say." She turned to face him, noting the unusual tension in his stance. "These past weeks, having you and Emma at the Triple S, it's reminded me what a home should feel like, what family feels like." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I haven't felt that since Sarah and Michael died." Elizabeth's heart quickened, but she remained silent, letting him find his words. "I'm not asking you to give up your plans for this land. In fact, I think it's one of the finest ideas I've heard. But I am asking, he took a deep breath, I'm asking if you might consider making your permanent home at the Triple S. With me. Jack, she began, her voice soft. I'm not good with fancy words, he continued, but I promise to respect you, to protect you and Emma, and to never give you cause to worry about tomorrow, if you'll have me. The simple sincerity of his proposal brought tears to Elizabeth's eyes. This man who had lost so much and built himself back from nothing was offering her not just security, but partnership, respect, a future. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jack Sullivan, I will have you. Relief and joy transformed his weathered face. He stepped forward, hesitantly at first, then drew her into an embrace. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise of things to come rather than a passionate declaration. When they parted, Jack kept her hand in his. We'll make it work, the ranch and your haven, together. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, 5 months after Elizabeth had first arrived at Oak Ridge Station. The small church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and candlelight cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Jack, dressed in a new black suit, watched Elizabeth walk down the aisle with an expression of such wonder and love that it brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers in attendance. Henry stood beside his brother as best man, pride evident in his face. Old Tom and Martha sat in the front pew, Emma perched on Martha's lap, watching with wide eyes as her mother and Jack exchanged vows. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with Reverend Thompson speaking movingly about second chances and the courage it takes to open one's heart after loss. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the Reverend declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Jack kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of friends and neighbors, even Sheriff Miller, who had become a staunch ally in the face of Thornton's continuing, if more subdued, opposition. 5 years later, the Triple S Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous spreads in the county. Hope Haven, built on Elizabeth's inherited property, had helped more than a dozen women start new lives, providing shelter, training, and community to those who had nowhere else to turn. On a warm spring afternoon, Jack led Emma, now 6 years old, to the corral where a gentle bay filly waited. Is she really for me, Pa? Emma asked, her eyes wide with excitement. She had started calling Jack Pa not long after the wedding, a development that had brought unexpected tears to his eyes the first time he heard it. Every Sullivan needs their own horse, Jack said, lifting her onto the filly's back. And you're a Sullivan. From the porch of the main house, Elizabeth watched them, their 2-year-old son William in her arms. Beside her stood a young woman newly arrived at Hope Haven, cradling an infant daughter. I don't know how to thank you enough, the woman said softly. I had nowhere else to go. Elizabeth smiled, remembering her own arrival 5 years earlier. Sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the beginning of the right path. We all deserve second chances, especially when someone is willing to help us weather the storm. She watched as Jack patiently taught Emma how to guide the filly, his hands steady and sure, as they had been the day he taught Elizabeth to shoot. He had shown her that real love wasn't in grand promises or flowery words, but in consistent actions, protecting, respecting, building together day by day. And that, she reflected, was a man's true legacy. Thank you for listening to Weathering the Storm. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage, redemption, and the American spirit. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment when what seemed like an ending turned out to be a new beginning? Until next time, my friends.